Hey, welcome to Soul Hub. So, in this episode, we're talking all about forgiveness and kindness. How to be forgiving and kind without being taken advantage of, without becoming a weak person that just gets trampled on. And it's actually a couple questions from two different people that are similar. So, I'll just start with the first one that comes from Sumaya, who's saying, I'm doing a lot of work on myself and have found myself in a place where I'm becoming almost too kind. I was so tough and proud in the past, and it just surprises me what I'm becoming. I don't want to become too kind so people start taking advantage of me. But on the other hand, the more I'm awake and aware, I can't help myself. I'm just nicer, just like that. How can I be tender and kind without being treated as a weak person? Especially in work situations, I still want to have charisma and leadership to lead my team. But if I listen to myself, I will just forgive everything all the time and they won't learn and they'll just continue making mistakes or not be professional. Same with my ex-partner. I didn't like cleaning, and if I asked him to clean, he'd get mad because he doesn't like it either. But if I was nice and just did it to avoid conflict, he would never help and would take advantage of my kindness. So what's the balance here? I want to be kind and forgiving, but still be respected and supported. Should I just choose a partner that's more aware and awake so we won't have this kind of argument? Or is there something I'm missing here? And then Farah also says, different question, how can I have the right balance regarding dealing with people that I don't like? Because being nice makes these people cross their limits again, and being rude is never a good option for me. So these are both great questions. They're similar. And it's really all about how can you be kind, how can you be loving, how can you be forgiving without becoming like a weak person or someone who gets taken advantage of or trampled upon and so forth. And it's a wonderful question. And it really has to do with one very basic misconception or misunderstanding that I find exists in the vast majority of people, even spiritual people who have been on the path for a very long time. And the basic misunderstanding is a confusion between two levels of being. All right? It's a confusion between what can be called form and content. So what does this mean? Well, form it can be looked upon as the external world. All right? Form is what you do. It's how you act. That's form on some level, right? And then there's content, and that's that inner attitude with which you do something. Okay? And it's a huge difference, and this is where all the confusion lies. So most people have this misconception that if you are someone who's forgiving or kind or loving, that you just let people do whatever they want. You just be nice all the time, and then you get taken advantage of. But that's actually not it at all. See, often when someone is being very nice, it is actually what Sumaya said. It's actually avoiding conflict, and there's some passivity in that. There is a lack of assertiveness in it, and usually there's actually a hidden egoic fear or an egoic trap, and that is that usually the being nice or the being extra kind is being done from a fear of disapproval. You don't want to say, let's say, no to someone, or you don't want to be firm to someone, or you don't want to put someone in their place or set boundaries because you're afraid of how they would judge you or how they would react towards you, and you're afraid of losing their approval. And that's actually an egoic fear. And so what happens? You act nice. And so that could be the case, for instance, Farah, when you're saying you don't like someone, but you don't want to be rude, but you're not setting limits. Or Sumaya, when you're saying when it was with your ex, right? When you were kind of being nice and doing the cleaning just to avoid conflict. All right. And so that's one off. So I had to mention that little trap, and you can be aware within yourself if that is you, and there's a way to work through that. But let me explain this bigger disconnect between form and content. So the truth is that you can be an extremely kind and loving, even unconditionally loving person without being quote unquote extra nice in people's eyes and always just doing what people want. And forgiveness also does not mean just letting people do whatever they want. Okay? And so here's the difference between form and content. True forgiveness or true kindness is an attitude of being. Okay, so let's say someone does something to wrong you. Just as an example, they do something that is clearly unkind or unloving, whether it's an action or words or whatever it may be. You can be forgiving inwardly towards them. You can, for instance, see them with compassion. You can see that the only reason they're doing that is not because they're horrible. They're a horrible person. The only reason they're doing that is because they're feeling inner pain and they're unconscious at that moment, or in general, depends. And that's the only reason they're acting like that. They're cut off from love. A part of them is suffering. And so your natural inward reaction could be to have compassion, to be fully understanding, and to be non-judgmental. Maybe you won't even judge them at all. And you realize there's no need for forgiveness because you're not even condemning them to begin with. Maybe that's your inner attitude towards them, and that's a beautiful inner attitude to have towards anyone, right? But outwardly, you may very well put them in their place and be very firm with them and tell them that kind of thing is completely unacceptable. Now the outward expression is the level of form. The inward attitude is the level of content. What is the content of your mind, of your being in that moment, of your consciousness? What is the content? If the content is kind, non-judgmental, and loving, then whatever action arises out of that is actually in their highest good. It's in their highest good for you to be very firm with them, put them in their place, and let them know, listen, this is not acceptable behavior. It's not acceptable for you to speak like that to me. But here's the difference. You're not saying it out of anger. You're not saying it out of a sense of victimhood, which is actually more of a sense of weakness. So you feel attacked, you feel threatened, so you come back out and you kind of lash out at them. That's not how it's being said. It's being said from actually a loving place. That you're not judging them, but that's still unacceptable. They need to learn, as adults, they need to learn how to act and how to not be toxic human beings, right? Just like you would teach a child. Think about it this way. What is the, conscious way to raise a child? Is it just to let them do whatever they want? You not set boundaries, you don't set any rules, you have no discipline? Well, that's not a loving thing. They're going to grow up to be a very spoiled child that has absolutely no boundaries and no discipline, and that's not good for them. All right, they're going to suffer a lot, and they're going to cause a lot of suffering if that's how they grow up. So the loving thing to do, even if you're not judging your child, even if you know this is just a child and they need to learn and they're not doing this out of spite or anything, they're just children, and inwardly you can be very loving towards them, but you can still be extremely firm. It's the same way with adults. You can see that they have their own inner child that's hurt. They can be acting in a certain way, and you can be inwardly loving while outwardly firm. It's not anger or hatred or annoyance or frustration that's driving your response to them. In fact, that's why it's called a response. See, if it was anger or any of that, that would be a reaction. It would be an automatic, unconscious reaction coming from just your conditioning, from your mind. They trigger you, and a reaction comes out. Whereas a response is coming from a deeper place. It's a conscious response. And that conscious response might need to be very firm. Now, not always. It depends, right? That's why if you are being conscious, if you are being present, sometimes in that moment, it needs to be a firm thing. And sometimes it could just be a kind thing like, hey, can you just kind of speak to me in a different way? And it depends on what will work for them, what they will understand. And sometimes they just won't understand. Their level of consciousness will be so low that they're just not going to get it. But that doesn't matter. You still need to be firm and say exactly what is right for you to say, and you need to set boundaries, right? In fact, here's a crazy story for you. I know someone who would be considered at an extremely high level of consciousness, very, very aware person. And this person has no relationship with his mother. He does not speak with her at all. Nothing. And yet inwardly, he has deep, unconditional love for her. Now, how does that make any sense? You'd think, well, how could someone be so loving and kind and have love for his mother and yet not speak to her? Wouldn't he have to be angry at her for him not to speak with her? And the truth is, not at all. This person's mother is a very narcissistic and very deeply toxic person. She just has a very low level of consciousness, and that's her evolution at this state of time, this point in time. And so she can't help but be very toxic and just kind of very manipulative and narcissistic and so forth. Now, this person is a very highly conscious, aware person, her son. So he doesn't want that in his life. He doesn't want that kind of manipulation, toxicity in his life. He tried numerous times to try to communicate from a very conscious place with his mother, and she just wouldn't have it. She wouldn't get it, and she continued being the same way. And so he made the conscious decision to move away from that. He didn't need that in his life, and it's not good for her either to have someone to prey upon, right? So he's not really being loving truly towards her if he just lets her act like that towards him. And so because she was of a low enough consciousness where he couldn't have a relationship with her that had correct boundaries because she just wouldn't respect them, the only truly loving and conscious thing to do was to no longer speak with her. Externally, that seems like unkind. But you see, that's the confusion between form and content. The external is the form. He stopped speaking with her. That's the form that it took. The content inwardly is only love and only compassion towards her. And his doors are open. If she were to show any willingness to grow, to respect boundaries, he would be more than happy to have a relationship with her. So do you see, this is an extreme example, but it's helpful to show the difference between form and content. You cannot confuse the two. I'll give you another example. If in business, someone completely does something extremely illegal with you, you can internally be very forgiving and realize this person wouldn't have done something like this unless, they were just of a lower level of consciousness. There's pain inside them that's making them act this way. And you can forgive them inwardly. But that doesn't mean you don't take them to court. Maybe that's what their soul needs to learn, to be taken to court and to suffer the actual consequences of their actions to learn, right? And so that's the key. What is your inner attitude? And so, Sumaya, for you with your work colleagues, for instance, you can be a very firm leader. You can expect very high professionalism. What else did you write here? You can, teach them their mistakes, right? And to learn from them. All while internally being forgiving, while internally not judging them, right? Forgiveness does not mean, just, you can get away with it. That's not a loving thing. How does that help them, right? It needs to be for their highest good. So you can be helpful. You can even, fire someone while still being completely loving. If they're not willing to grow, if they're not willing to really put anything out that is of value, if they're not willing to respect the rules or whatever, they need to learn. And it's actually for that soul's highest good to learn by possibly being fired. All right? And Farah, for instance, like if someone you don't like, right? It's not rude to be very firm with that person saying, for instance, no, if they want to spend time with you. No, I don't have time, or I'd prefer to be doing something else. It's not rude if they say something that is rude for you to be very clear about your boundaries of what you'll accept or not accept. But inwardly, you can be feeling very loving towards them at the same time. Now, usually what can happen when you're like that is they respond positively to that because they need that kind of boundary, and actually they'll respect you more. The ego's afraid if I do this, if I'm firm, I'll lose approval, but you can actually gain, now not that approval matters, but you can gain respect of that person. And then if you don't, if they act extra defensive and attack you, well, fine, cut them off. You don't need them in your life. You don't need a toxic person in your life. Which brings me to the last question here, Sumaya, about your ex-partner, right? And you're saying, well, if I'm nice, he'll just take advantage of it. So what's what's the balance? Well, the balance is you're only being nice in that position to avoid conflict. And that is not authentic kindness. That is just a withdrawal. That is a lack of courage to face the conflict and be there and be present with it and address it. So basically what you're doing is you're enabling that partner to act unconsciously, to take advantage of you. And that's not a loving thing to do. You don't want to enable people's unconsciousness. All right? And so in that instance, there's a couple options. One, you stand very firmly and you say, look, there's a compromise. We both hate cleaning. We have to share it. And if he continues to not like that, then maybe you can compromise on something else you don't like. You'll do the cleaning, for instance, and he'll do something else. And if he continues not to, now clearly he's your ex-partner, so things didn't work out. But, if it's something that's important enough and it continues not working out, at some point you may have to end the relationship. And that might be the most loving thing for both of you. It might be the loving thing for you because you respect yourself more and you give yourself what you deserve. And it might be the most loving thing for that person, so they learn. And so someone is not enabling their unconscious behavior. You see, so just this understanding between form and content can fix all this and can bring so much clarity, because you can apply it to any situation. And you can realize that something can be loving even if the form, quote unquote, doesn't seem loving externally, but no one knows the energy with which you're doing it. It's not what you do, it's how you do it internally, with what attitude. That is all the difference. And that's what applies here too. And then the last thing is you're asking here, I just want to cover all these questions because they're all good, is should I choose a partner that is more aware and awake so we won't have this kind of argument, or is there something I'm missing? Well, let's assume you don't have a partner right now. Well, yeah, it can make sense to choose someone who's more aware and awake if you resonate with them. But it's not always so straightforward. It could be that you just feel compelled or very drawn to someone who's, let's say, not that awake and aware. And it might be because, karmically speaking, you have some lessons to learn. Karma doesn't mean punishment. People misunderstand that concept too. Karma means there's certain things in your conditioning that are still controlling you. And so you might need certain situations that bring out that unconscious conditioning so you can see it more clearly and you can transcend it. And so you may need that type of a person. There's no hard and fast rule around this one. So I wouldn't say, for instance, stay in an abusive relationship because that's what your soul needs to learn. Well, no, maybe your soul needs to learn to have the courage to stand up and leave. Or get into a relationship where the other person is very awake and aware. Well, maybe you're meant to be with someone a little less awake and aware, so they really trigger you and push your buttons and you grow more. You can't really tell. There's no template for that. You have to feel into that. And kind of the way I would say to feel into that is, if there could be egoic conflict on the surface level, but do you sense a deeper soul connection? Do you sense a deeper love there? And even if you're at different levels of consciousness, if you sense that deeper love and that deeper soul connection, maybe you're still meant to be together. Even if that person isn't quote unquote awake and aware. Maybe they will become, maybe your being together will trigger that awakening and you're doing them the greatest service by being with them. So you see, it's not that kind of simplistic. That's why you really have to feel into it and not just listen to the mind. Feel into it and see what feels right for you. What feels like the right thing. And sometimes it becomes clear that you're drawn towards someone that you're meant to be with for certain reasons. And other times, it's pretty clear that this person's toxic. They're not willing to grow. They're not showing any signs that they want to work on themselves, even if they are, let's say, currently at a lower level of consciousness. Then maybe there's no point in that relationship, right? And so that's how you want to look at that particular aspect. But again, just to, conclude everything, it really is all about understanding the difference between form and content. And this can apply to everything on the spiritual path and in life, that can really essentially just remove a lot of confusion. Because spiritual people, quote unquote, often feel, I need to be spiritual. I need to be kind. And like, and it's a front that the ego actually puts up. And a lot of it is the ego, and a lot of it is just pure confusion. Whereas they don't realize you don't need to, quote unquote, act spiritual. It's all internal, right? And an act that seemingly doesn't seem spiritual could be the most loving thing you do to someone else if you're doing it actually from a state of consciousness that is loving. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps. Please send in more wonderful questions like this. You can email them in at support@soulhub.com. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you so much.